Hello and welcome to The Last Word, the podcast from Heather Robinson Limited that brings powerful conversations to the forefront with people making real impact across the industry and beyond. So today, we are thrilled to be joined by Rachel Belliere-Wilson, a woman with a truly extraordinary journey and a serious track record to match. So there's so much to say about you, Rachel, so I'm going to kick off with a few things. So 30 years and over actually in the live events arena, 20 plus years of coaching, operational and leadership experience, a DE&I speaker, inclusion and diversity working group member, a UKCC accredited coach, an ICF accredited transformational coach, a former Team GB para athlete, now a GBR coach, an industry judge, awards panelist, a head of division level leader, and to top it off, you are just celebrating over 4 years as the founder of the Accessibility and Inclusion Solutions, which is amazing. So Rachel, this is your story, one of resilience, reinvention and relentless commitment to making things better for others. So Rachel, welcome to The Last Word. Let's dive straight in.
Oh, thank you so much for that rather exuberant welcome, and thank you for mentioning all those. I'm just looking over my shoulder to see who that person is.
It's you. So we're going to understand the foundations of you. So we're here to talk about the DE&I, but there's lots of terms being floated around, and there's DE&I, EDI, DEIA, so many letters, like I say, flying around. But let's get back to basics. Rachel, what exactly does diversity, equality and inclusion mean?
And that's actually, it's a great question, that is, Denise, because I think these words can almost become a little bit meaningless in the end and sort of just sit over there in a policy. So it's really great to kind of get that conversation going and just dive into what we're actually trying to achieve with this. And probably the best way of getting into the conversation is to look at what that end result is that we're aiming for. What is the end ambition? And at least for me, that's for people like me who are different to be able to show up without apology, to be able to feel connected, included, part of the conversation, be able to participate, and to do that as independently and as with as much value as I can, as much as the next person. Mm-hmm. And I think kind of that's what I'm trying to achieve when I'm setting about engaging with anybody in this kind of a conversation. Mm-hmm. But just to kind of reflect back on the wording, if we want to unpick that a little bit, then diversity is about, it's a fact, we are all different. We're in this incredibly diverse world. We are, by design, uniquely different. And that shows up in our socio-economic background, our beliefs, our culture, our identity, our ability, our skills, our likes, our dislikes, not just in the minority groupings that are probably more apparent when we think about what difference is. So it's very relatable, and actually that's what makes the world so colourful and vibrant and energetic. Putting that onto the map is to enable people to just to appreciate difference, and turn that appreciation into real understanding, to enable people to show up as themselves. Equity's kind of elbowed equality a bit out of the way, hasn't it? There's still a place for equality, but equity, I love that term, and actually it means a lot to me. And what that enables us to start thinking about is that we're all at a different starting point, and we don't all perhaps need exactly the same thing, the same treatment, to be able to perform to our best, or to be able to do something, or participate in something in the same way that somebody else can. So there's a great visual picture of this, in actual fact, with a man who, let's say, is 6 foot, another person who might be 5 foot, and another person who might be 4 foot, and they're all standing behind a barrier. And the 6 foot person can see over the barrier, but the 5 foot person not so well, and the 4 foot person not at all. So if we gave them all total equality, i.e. give them nothing, or give them a little 2-inch platform, it's not going to achieve the result that leaving the 6 foot person alone because they don't need any, giving the 5 foot person a 4-inch platform, and then maybe giving the 4 foot person a foot platform, brings them up to a level where they can all engage. And that's what equality is really about. So just, translate that into how somebody might access an event, or engage in an event, or participate in an event. It's about just applying some different thinking to enable everybody to engage in the same way. And then inclusion is about how we can get all of these people involved in the conversation and make them feel a bigger part of it, by enabling them to feel valued, by bringing equality into the mix, by celebrating diversity and difference. So all of these things are really interconnected, and yet have different sort of meanings along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, why is it important? Why is DE&I important? Obviously, from your life history, you tell us about how, you are different. We were talking about celebrating everyone being different, but you had an accident on your horse. So talk us through get my teeth in. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I was 17 when I had a riding accident, as you said, and that was a kind of a pivotal, life-changing moment. So I went into hospital for nearly a year, and I came out of that viewing the world very differently, and not only did the world look very different to me, but the world actually treated me very differently too. Now, we are going back quite a long time. This was sort of 30 plus years ago now, and we've come a long way in the world, but we've come a long way, but not so far as well. And so I suddenly had to find myself thinking differently about everything that I did, about every challenge that met me, every moment of the day. But what that actually did for me is it enabled me to apply that different thinking, because of my difference, to everything that I did. And actually, I think what it did was it gave me a very different lens to look at the world through. And so when I sort of gravitated into the world of live events, I found I brought something different to it. And that wasn't just in the events that I was delivering and how I was looking at those events, but it was also in the team that I was building around me. So, and it isn't until, time passes and I look back that I sort of recognise that now, that within that team that we built in that organisation, we had Muslims working alongside Hindus in such a collaborative manner. We had people who were brought in to that business because they truly were the best people to bring some different ideas and shape different creative, exciting solutions in a way that I wouldn't have thought of, or you wouldn't have thought of, because they brought something different. Their experiences were different. Their life script was different. And that brought such a creative buzz where anything went. And I think I've kind of gone off piste a little bit from your original question, but what we were also enabled to do, and actually that was through the leadership of that business, and I strongly believe that one of the people who was leading that business was in that position to think a bit differently, because they also had their own difference that they brought. They had a family that was made up of different shapes and sizes, of adoption and difference, and different ethnic origins too. And so it was really a comfortable place to thrive in, and to be able to say to us, what do you need to do your best work? You tell us what you'll need and we'll make it happen. And what that then did was it created an incredibly loyal environment where we all knew we would get what would enable us to give our best work. And I think we all brought that, not just me through my difference, but we all brought that to that business, and that's what made it such a successful and actually what made it such an enjoyable and rewarding place to be. And that kind of showed up through what we then delivered to our customers and clients.
I think it showed the innovation, didn't it? I think that was the key part of it.
Yeah,
I would agree.
And that all came down to recognising and appreciating difference.
And just opening the conversation as well, which I don't think had, it wasn't as widely encouraged, available. It was particularly, I think, in events, it's quite an elitist industry.
Yeah, it is completely.
And it's quite a one-dimensional industry. I think it's less so now.
Yeah.
But I think celebrating that diversity and that mix of brilliant sort of ideas and melting pot of like you say, of cultures, nationalities and everything was quite unusual at the time.
It was incredibly unusual. And this was going back way before diversity, actually, and inclusion was
it wasn't a tick box. It was just a thing. It was just an environment.
It was an environment. It absolutely was. And I think that absolutely played out in our ability to deliver excellent events to multicultural organisations,
absolutely,
and deliver truly globally. So
I would agree.
It was
because the audience is never going to be one-dimensional.
Exactly.
So you've got to think in a different way, and I think for me that's what's been so exciting about hearing about what you do is because you're coming at it from a very personal perspective, but also from a few years of experience of seeing, experiencing all this too. And I think what I find quite frustrating with a lot of sort of directives is there's a lot of box ticking.
There is.
And I think what we're keen to explore is kind of not the box ticking, but the doing. And actually just thinking about it more holistically rather than just, have I ticked the simple box just to get us through or to get us accreditations or whatever it is.
Why is DE&I so important? We talk about, it's not just a corporate box tick now. So, but in terms of real impact on real people and performance, should we sort of unpick that?
Yeah, and actually I think that's kind of leads on to the conversation we were just exploring in that being a great demonstration of why it is, why it's important, why it's essential if you want to be successful. And actually, as Heather, you said, the audience, the world is a full mix of lots of different shapes and colours and sizes and varieties. So if you're going to truly serve that audience in the best way you can, then you have to be able to understand it. And actually, if looking inwardly, if your culture isn't reflecting that, if your knowledge base isn't reflecting that, if you have no lived experience of the true representation of the world, then you're looking through a very narrow lens, and you will probably be delivering in a very narrow field. So the opportunity for organisations and businesses to deliver better, to come up with the most creative solutions, and to deliver those creative solutions most effectively to a diverse audience, is to have that existing successfully within their organisations. So that is why it's important. But you can't just have diversity alone, you have to have the rest of it. It's a package.
It's a package, yeah. It's not a one size fit.
You have to be able to then think equitably about how you then enable those people to show up as their true selves, to be able to bring their best selves into that workplace every single day. And that might mean giving them all slightly different ways to do that, and the freedom to do that. And involving everybody, being more curious and exploring those conversations, as you said, and actually being brave enough to ask the big, maybe the slightly uncomfortable questions, the things that take us out of our comfort zones, by asking by doing this, who might I be excluding? Who might I be excluding from engaging in my audience?
I think that's a really valid point, because we too have been around a long time, and and I'm not sure that certainly I've ever considered it as much as I should do at every stage. I might have thought about it briefly if there was an extreme option, or an extreme kind of environment, or challenging content, or whatever it may be, that might or might not kind of support this thinking, but not on the everyday. And it's the everyday that we should be thinking about as well. It's not just the kind of opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and actually I think to go back to your tick box comment, it isn't about, where disability is concerned, for instance, it isn't just about thinking by having an accessible toilet and a ramp that you've done it. It's fully accessible. And accessibility, that's a big word for a lot of very, very different things. But actually 24% of the population is disabled, and if you're not actually thinking a little more deeply about these kind of things, that's a huge chunk of the population that you're excluding.
Well, when we were talking about this podcast, interestingly, I'm going to break the fourth wall now, because I was talking to Mark, who's our cameraman on this, and I was saying, because it got me thinking, and I was thinking, well, when we do internal videos even, shouldn't there be an option for subtitles or what? Because we're assuming A, English is everyone's first language, B, and that's listening and also speaking on these videos. So, it's also sort of making it accessible for everybody, but it shouldn't just be an afterthought, or particularly when you're sort of dealing with sort of multi-language, it should be surely on everything, because as you say, if 24% of people have some sort of disability, we don't know of the 13,000 of the internal staff that we're doing a video for, how many of those people have hearing issues or language issues or whatever it may be. So,
and actually, one in 5 people with less physical disability, and I would put hearing impairment potentially in that category. On that note, my mum has a hearing difficulty. She wouldn't call herself disabled, and she wouldn't actually think to mention it either. But how many people are then being compromised in the workplace?
Yeah.
And that, the 1 in 5, they don't mention it for fear of it being held against them.
Absolutely.
So there are still stigmas that exist, and by not actively creating accessible content, we're doing ourselves and our consumers a disservice.
No, 100%.
Absolutely. So DE&I in practice then. So can you share some real world examples of the DE&I principles, specifically in the live events arena? So what does inclusive planning and venue selection look like? We were having a pre-chat before we went live. We were talking about an accessible stage for a disabled speaker. There wasn't one, sounds ludicrous. How do you make speaker lineups and content more representative, as we've just discussed? What role does accessible design and signage play on site? Again, thinking outside of the box, we think of big this and this, but actually it could be the little things that make all the difference. How do we better support diverse suppliers and partners? And finally, what does inclusive communication look like and feel like across the entire event journey, from invites right through to post-event feedback?
Gosh, some big questions there.
So, over to you.
Over to you, Rachel. You can do one at a time if you want.
And actually, I think with one thing that shows up for me there is how enormous this subject is, and I think that's one of the issues, is that it is big and it can feel quite overwhelming. And I think the worry about that is that can stop events, businesses doing anything for fear of getting it wrong.
Yeah,
but
I think
also
that's a really
because
big
it's so big, it's kind of like,
do we go there?
I've got no idea where to start.
Yeah.
So let's just put that to one side for a moment and deal with what's coming up next, because we're so busy.
Well, they must. They might feel
left.
like a sort of a Pandora's box. You're opening something.
Exactly.
Going, I don't know where to start. So it's
Exactly.
easy to leave that box very firmly closed and
Exactly.
do things how you've always done them.
Yeah. So I think first off, make it a leading thought, because it is much easier to have that conversation at the start and start unpicking that and actually being honest with yourselves around the table about what might and might not be possible, but start the conversation right at the beginning, because it's much easier to do that than to retrofit. For example, and I'll give you an example of retrofitting. When I was working in an organisation a few years ago, one of my colleagues came up and said they just found out that one of the partners of a key attendee, a significant attendee, was a wheelchair user, and the gala evening that the client had actually booked before this organisation was involved in it was a beautiful Grade 1 listed building. The event was being held upstairs, and there was no lift access. And the outcome was the client, in the end, elected to lose the deposit on that venue, cancel the whole venue, and rebook something. So the cost was phenomenal. Had that been a leading thought at the beginning, or had that agency asked sufficient questions, maybe it could have been a different outcome. So bring it into the discussion at the beginning and have those discussions. If we're talking about agencies here, have those discussions with your clients, bring it into the conversation and start making it a bit more normalised for a start off. Understand, get some intelligence on the audience. So there are cost considerations, but by making the adjustments for the few, this can bring a much better experience for the many, for everybody, not just for the few. Everybody benefits. And I'll give you an example of that. I was at a theatre performance, and we had inadvertently booked a signed performance. Now, at the beginning of the performance, they had some technical problems and started communicating, and the person on the stage was signing the issues that were going on. And in the end, the voice of God stopped and the signer just carried on signing because it worked for everybody and everybody engaged with it. It felt far more of an inclusive experience, and I loved it. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would actually go and do that again in preference to just going and seeing a performance that was not signed. And it was such a joyous thing to feel part of a world that I hadn't previously felt part of, or hadn't actually really even considered.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the Strictly Come Dancing was a great, with Rose, I think her name was Rose and Giovanni, and actually I'm an avid watcher, but that really did touch me in a way that I when she did that silent dancing, you do go into that person's world and you have a massive appreciation of what they actually go through day to day. And then you have empathy and put yourself in that position. But I thought that was a tremendous thing to do, and really impactful and powerful.
Completely.
Great to see it in the mainstream.
Yeah,
Wasn't
absolutely.
it? Yes. And it's great to see more of that
Yes.
with Chris McCausland, who was then in it.
He was just awesome as well.
Yeah. And lovely to sort of share those experiences, feel like you're sharing those experiences,
and normalise
just
them.
Getting a brief insight into to other people's worlds. And on that note, to come back to your question, that's a really important part of the consideration, is where you can bring in people with lived experience, and consultants like me, but actually also look within your own team, because as we've already established, we all have different experiences to bring to the conversation. So look to your own team, understand, explore, be more curious about your own team. Who do they know? What goes on in their world? What can they offer up that might be really helpful to your events and to your thinking in that planning and design stage. Get your checklists and your guidelines. They are useful. They're not a fail-safe, because it's such a broad field.
And every event's different.
And every event's different, and everybody's experience is different. But they will start giving you those reminders of what to think about as you go on a site recce, and asking those questions about, well, what happens if?
And I think you mentioned clients before, and I think that's a really valid point as well, because, it's on a slightly different subject, but with a similar kind of challenge/outcome. We talk about sustainability and things where we have to demonstrate that we can provide sustainable assets, build items, whatever it might be for an event. But obviously there's a price tag attached to that, of anywhere between sort of 5 and 20%. So we have to consider that and present that to the client, and then the sustainability often becomes less important to them when there's a slightly higher price tag to it. So I think we're going to experience similar when there's cost sort of challenges in sort of meeting DE&I expectation as well. But that's not a reason not to do it, in the same way as we punt out our sustainable option first every time as well. It's got to be considered.
I hear you loud and clear. And actually, there are lots of venues which actually have, by asking the right questions, there are lots of venues that have great accessible features already. Things just to kind of look out for and avoid for me would be things like, we always remember what happens. What's your first and your last experience? So think about not just the main entrance, but how are people arriving to and going back from your event. If it's a nightmare to get to, or if it's too difficult, you may even get some of your audience who'll go, I won't even bother showing up, because actually that whole journey is not, it's not an accessible situation for me. I've got to take 3 different. I mean,
but it's true. It's a consideration.
It's worth considering. How accessible is your venue? Is there really good parking, accessible parking nearby to the venue? Is it a great accessible venue, or is there literally no way I can get there independently as a wheelchair user, for example? So have a think about that as the venue, but make sure everybody's going to experience it in the same way where you possibly can. So for me, it feels already like I have been a second-class citizen if I've got to go in via the back entrance, past the dustbins,
the loading bay,
and up the loading lift. You've already made me feel like actually I'm not valued as much as the 75% of the rest of the audience, and that's going to affect my state of mind when I've already arrived. But there are lots of things that we can do, even when we can't do everything, just by having the right team with the right attitude,
approach, exactly,
to fill in those gaps. And I think that's kind of the big win for live events team, because we are a hospitality industry. We should be doing these things much better. And there are people within our events teams who are really good at it, who just have really high emotional intelligence and who get this and who can do it naturally without making it feel awkward. And just know how to say the right things in the right way, and not be able to shy away from the big questions.
And do you think, because they don't, do these conversations not happen because nobody wants to sort of open up that awkward conversation? But it shouldn't be awkward. It should be very much an open conversation of inclusivity. But do you think some of those conversations don't happen because people may offend or think they might
lack of education, maybe?
Well, I think there's 2 reasons. One is that it doesn't get thought of at all, and then
it doesn't affect me, therefore I'm not going to think about it.
It hasn't crossed my radar. Or as you say, that I just don't know how to get into this without feeling like I might cause offence. So I'll just walk away and hope that somebody else picks it up. And that's a shame. And I think that, I would really encourage people to be braver and to have a go, because we'll never learn if we don't have a go. But also don't be worried about failing. We'll all get it wrong. And, me with all my lived experience will still get it wrong, because I can only look at it through my lens, and I bring my own biases into play. So don't be afraid of getting it wrong, but apologise quickly and sincerely, and listen and ask the next question. How could I have done it better for you? What would have made it that bit better? What would have enabled this to be an excellent experience for you? And apologise. I didn't mean that, came out wrong. I didn't mean it to come out like that. I can see it hasn't landed how I meant it to land. I wonder if I can ask you what would have landed better. How could I have said it better? Just to I really want to get it right next time. And I can't think of anybody who would take offence if you're sincere and you're authentic and you're looking to do better.
And I think what's great nowadays is that because as we know, it's not just about sort of visible things, it's also about non-visible, inclusion as well. And I think the fact that it's, whether it's neurodiverse, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's whatever it might be, that is the challenge for this audience that we're sort of reaching out to. I think it's much more in the public domain now, which is great, because it helps bridge that gap of educating but also confidence in sort of taking these things on as well, which is good too. Where else would you suggest that people look to get sort of guidance or information and, you know, and that kind of thing? I mean, obviously you're a consultant yourself, which is great, and people can come to you for professional advice, and what about outside of that too, as a general kind of overview? Where would you suggest?
Well, I think for a start, if you mentioned neurodivergence there, and I think we have a lot to thank neurodivergence coming up into the conversation more, to thank it for, because I think neurodivergence has put accessibility on a greater map, because there are far more, one in seven I think are currently kind of thought to be neurodivergent. So there are going to be people who have different ways of viewing content and viewing language and information and communication in the workplace, in your workplace, in your the businesses you work for, in their workplace. So suddenly it becomes a lot more relevant, doesn't it? And actually, as I sort of mentioned earlier, learn from within, find out what you can do to serve those people better, engage them in conversations, and by doing so, you'll start learning. I have 2 children, one of whom's adopted, and he's recently undergone an ADHD diagnosis, and I'm learning all the time about that. There's so much information that's accessible to us on the internet nowadays. So I would just really encourage you to do your research, but also to go out into the community and just start conversations with everyday people who are not like you, and just find out that little bit more. That is the best and most organic way of it starting to mean something to you individually, and for you to be able to then carry that forward into your work.
I think we were talking about the sort of great leaps that particularly in things like schools and education have done, particularly with neurodivergence as well, and maybe learning from that too, and, you know, having quiet spaces or places where people can opt out and that sort of thing, which is obviously in all the schools and all the educational sort of places now, but why shouldn't it be available in workplaces, and therefore when you're in remote workplace or events or whatever it might be as well? And I think it's all of those sorts of, you know, as I say, all these things have started to come to the fore since we've started talking,
I think they
which
have,
is great.
actually, I think that's one thing that the events industry has started to grab hold of, and I'm seeing much more of those within the events environments. Not so much the physical accessibility leaps
that's
forward.
interesting. Okay.
So that's been quite
That's really interesting, actually.
Is that, and that's sort of what resonated with me, is that it's landed because it's been really relevant to quite a lot of people. They go, okay, I recognise myself in that. Let's have a quiet space.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. How irritating.
Yeah, slightly.
Yeah.
And yet they're still not putting an access.
No, exactly. I mean, I would be really cross. Yeah, isn't it typical?
So, yeah, but it's baby
That's a really
steps,
good learning
but
point.
It's baby steps, and let's celebrate every advancement that's done.
Let's take the positives out of that one.
Yeah. But there's a well, so I've read there's a DE&I backlash, and so there are some troubling headlines recently, especially in the US. So major companies like Costco, Apple, Goldman Sachs, they're all pushing against the DE&I initiative. So what's going on there? How are you interpreting this?
Yeah, I think that was a really unsettling time. I feel like it has settled a little. Maybe that's just my lens, but I do feel like it has settled a little now. But it's certainly what, with all of those headlines, as you've just mentioned, hitting the media in particular, and that being a great bad news story for the world to jump on. I think what that did was it gave permission to some businesses who were the tick boxes, just to go, fine, we were never really that invested in it anyway, but we now have permission just to move away from it. So I think what I would encourage everybody to do is look beyond the headlines, and for those businesses that you've just mentioned, I actually think Costco actually is one of those that has pushed back against that. In fact, I think if I'm right, their shareholders, they were very strongly wanting to stand by their DEI ambitions, because they absolutely believe in them. And their shareholders voted something like 92% voted to stay with their programmes. So that's a great example of what's going on, is that we're probably getting the divides of the businesses that went, okay, well, we didn't really think it, we weren't really very invested in it. And then there is many that I can point to, like, Deutsche Bank, Costco, Delta Airlines, and many of them that have gone, well, hang on a minute, we've seen this actually play out. We know we've got a stronger culture by creating a more diverse workforce, by providing them with what they need. We've created more engagement, more loyalty, our profits are working for us, we're more efficient, we've got the best ideas coming forward. So why would we scrap it? It wouldn't make sense on any level, not just because we're ticking a box, not because we have a moral obligation to do it, but actually because it's important stuff to do for us to move forward and to be the best business we can be. So I think that's what's really going on, and those are the conversations that are now being had in organisations, and where do we stand? And I think that's why it's really important always to ask what is your why? Why are you doing this? Why are you really invested in it? And it's the question I always start with whenever I go into an organisation. Why do you want to do this? And I'm always intrigued to understand whether that has started from people that just sit within the business, and that will inevitably be because it means something personal to them, or whether that actually lives in leadership. Because if it doesn't live in leadership, it will never get legs. And the guys here, the people here that are working, the folks here that are working so hard on the ground to make it happen, will only be able to do what they can do there. The impact will only really happen if leadership is fully invested in it, and it isn't just words on the wall in their mission and vision and values, that it actually plays out in their everyday being and feeling and thinking.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So your personal mission, let's talk about that. So why are you doing what you're doing? Tell us more about that.
What I'm doing. Well, yeah, I kind of a couple of things kind of as often happens, just things all happen at the same time, and I had this sort of epiphany moment. There were personal reasons for me with my own sort of family makeup in actual fact, but the real epiphany for me, and the time that truly changed my thinking about the world I was inhabiting professionally was a moment in time when I was participating in an event as a guest, and I'd been invited by a business that knew me very, very well, and my first question always is, am I going to be able to participate fully? I'm a very independent person, and I feel I've worked really hard to sort of make my world the place that I can inhabit independently and with purpose. And I went along to that event having been told that it was absolutely fully accessible, and I showed up, and the accessible parking was blocked by one of the event trucks. So I went and parked miles away in the other parking, and luckily I got the wheelchair in the back of the car, so I pushed on a very hot day all the way back again on a road, because there was no accessible way to get onto the pavement. So I pushed back uphill up the road over the speed bumps. The irony wasn't lost on me. And I got there in a very hot, sweaty mess, because it was a boiling hot day, to an environment that was on grass, which is not ideal for somebody in a wheelchair. But never mind, I was going to have a great day. And the first thing I always do when I look around, and this is something I always do when I go to any venue, as Heather will tell you, is I look at where the loos are and how far away everything is. And distance is important to me, but it's important to lots of people too. And so I asked where the toilets were, and I was pointed downhill on the grass, just down there. And so I pushed myself down, and I spotted some really beautiful toilets for anybody who can leap up 7 or 8 stairs. And they were really lovely, got nice hand soaps in them, smellies, beautiful lighting, flushed, hot and cold running water. And then I spotted the accessible facilities, which was a chemical porta loo underneath a tree, which was already hot and smelly, and it was one of these lovely lovely loos that if and it's a big if, you can actually
get the door open.
It then
smacks you in the back, yeah,
and squashes you like a fly on the back wall. And there was no mirror, there were no hand wash facilities, and really usefully, it was a foot pump to operate the loo. Boom. So I came out of that, and I had to give myself a real inward talking to go, right, don't let this get to your day. You're here to have a fabulous day. This is a celebration event. This is a recognition event. So off I pushed back uphill, and got there just in time to get it to be called into the main conference, back downhill to the conference, which was in a semi-permanent structure, which was accessible. Well, I say that. No, let me backtrack. It was accessible in that I could get up to it without it was step free, but it had been set up in such a tight manner that there was only one place I could sit, and that was right on the outside of the seating area. And actually it was, I walk on sticks, but it was so tight, it wasn't going to be safe for me to shuffle in and try and get between the chairs and get to anywhere else. So I sat on my own, where everybody else moved to sort of the inside, the entire conference session. And so by this time, my self-esteem was going down. And there were many other things that went on with that event, not least the team building, which for, I would say, 80% of the audience who weren't either had mobility problems or who had hearing problems or had neurodivergence or sight limitations, it was a fabulous experience. But for any of those, for the 24% of other people, it was not an inclusive, accessible, or even a feasible thing to do. So by that point in the day, I've never considered myself disabled. I had never been made to feel more disabled in that moment than at that event. And so I left that event at the end of the day thinking, I don't fit here. This world was not, that environment and that event situation had not for one moment been considered from any point of view other than the point of view of whoever had created that event. And it changed it just gave me a whole sort of awakening of how it might feel, not just for me, but for other people that were different, experiencing any event situation. So that was the moment that accessibility and inclusion solutions kind of became a thing, and that was my turning point, and it was my opportunity. I've told a sobering story, but the opportunity here is to help, to start trying to unlock some of that thinking for agencies, for organisers who don't have that lived experience or that ability to look through a slightly different lens, and enable their events, their environments, their conversations, their communications to be accessible to everyone and inclusive to everyone. And it isn't that difficult. It just takes a little bit of deeper thinking.
I think it's a really, like you say, it's a very sobering story. And I've known you a very long time, as has Denise, and you are anything but a quitter or anyone that, I can't imagine you ever going, that's going to hold me back, or that's good, because it never has in your past. You've embraced everything, and I think, when Denise read out the litany of achievements you've done, people know that you are that individual. And there are many in that 24-25% who aren't, by nature, quite so able to kind of brush themselves off and get on with it and battle on. And I think that's, if you felt like that, they will have felt
that's it.
as bad, if not worse.
People with difference, generally speaking, are able to, every day is about finding a different way around a problem. They are good problem solvers, but everybody has a breaking point. And actually, I think this is you'd asked earlier, Denise, and I kind of never really answered your question in full. But what needs to happen in the planning stages? So the planning stages, for example, starts from the moment the invitation hits an inbox. It doesn't start from the moment that person arrives at an event. So think about, tell the full story, tell people what is and isn't possible, and know what is and isn't possible. Be honest, tell the truth fast, get there quickly, and invariably you won't have thought of everything. So ask the question: what can we do to meet? What are your needs? What can we do to meet your needs specifically? Open up those conversations, and by doing that, everybody will start to feel more included and feel valued and part of something that serves a bigger purpose.
And going back to, you referenced the agency where we all worked actually, and having that moment of feeling empowered. And I always remember having a brainstorm, and I was fairly new into the event world, and the creative director, they were having a brainstorm and thinking about ideas, how to do things differently, and getting the post-it notes on the wall. And I just sat there in silence because I thought this was overwhelming, because I'm like, I don't have a voice and I'm not sure whether I do have anything to say. But he was so good in making everyone feel at ease and saying, do you know what, it doesn't matter, it's where you've been, it's what you've read, it's what you've encountered that counts. And as soon as he said that, it kind of lifted that lid of, oh, so I do have something to say, because actually I think it's more like this. And like you say, actually having that empowerment, having a leadership team, enabling, their colleagues and their staff, if you want to, for another word, but allowing them to be them and to put their point across, or speak freely, looking through a different lens, or whatever it might be. I think that's really empowering for, business leaders out there who probably want to change or want to do something, not just tick a box, but do something really authentic. Because I have never felt, other than obviously doing what we do now, never felt so empowered, never felt so included. And like you say, the trust that building had between every colleague was just, I know that it was a work, but it was a work family. And I don't say that lightly, because work is work. But we were genuinely, we trusted each other. The job got done. We, rolled up sleeves till whatever time, stuffing envelopes or whatever. But the trust and the camaraderie, but everyone's view was really taken on board and respected.
Yeah, and I like that, that everybody's view, and everybody's view that was different, was respected and appreciated, and it counted. And I think that's a really good point that you bring up there, is that there aren't right and wrongs. It's just about looking at it differently, and that we are all going to have a different way of finding a way around it. But let's have that conversation about how we can find a different way around it if we can't sort of fix it completely.
Yeah, it's the conversation which is the key, isn't it, really? So let's turn to something incredibly timely. The European Accessibility Act, which I believe is at the end of this month. We're talking June 28th. So what do businesses need to know about it, and what kind of impact will this have on product, services and events too?
Yeah, it's a good question. Now, particularly if you're, it doesn't matter if you're a UK agency, it will still affect you if you're delivering events in the EU. So the Act in principle is aimed about creating a more accessible digital world in principle, but it goes more deeply than that. So it will expect events organisers to be providing an accessible service when you're bringing an event into the EU. So that will mean, in terms of how you deliver your content, for example, and things like speech to text, for example, or signing, and so make sure that you're aware of it, and I would encourage you to go and look at the source information. I'm sure we can put a link on something, direct your listeners to this, just to get really clued up on it. But don't think just because you're a UK business that it doesn't affect you. If you're delivering out there in the EU, then you need to know the detail, and you need to be able to be delivering to your audiences in an accessible, a truly accessible manner.
Okay. So inclusion in events then, so focusing on the events industry, which we know and love, what are the big considerations, and how can event professionals lead the way in DE&I, especially when you say small changes make the big difference?
Yes, deepen your understanding, I think, would be the first step. Be more curious, understand how you can serve your whole audience better. Ask the question, by doing what I'm doing, who might I be excluding? Inadvertently, probably, but who might I be excluding? And also consider that by making a change, what's right for the few is right for everybody. So it isn't just that you're serving it for 25% or even a smaller percentage of your audience. Everybody will benefit from that, from some of the conversations that we've had already. So I think those are the kind of the things to kind of hold close and keep in mind, rather than getting too overwhelmed in the enormity of what you might be launching into. Dip your toe in. Make an ambition of one change on your next event, and just reflect on what the difference is that you make from that.
Are there any best practices that you've seen? Any little nuggets that you've kind of seen that you kind of go, that was well thought through? Or if there aren't, maybe not, but
yeah, I mean, it's
quite disappointing if there aren't, but there may be.
I think there's certainly from there are some great initiatives that some of the venues have put in, and one thing that comes up for me is when I was on a panel in Blackpool at the conference centre there, and they've got a great lift accessible stage. So what it meant was not that I was accessing the stage from in a different manner to everyone else, but we all came up on that. And I really liked that, because it was a properly inclusive way of getting there, of arriving onto the stage, and for the impression that gave the audience as well. I think that was really powerful. And obviously that's not going to be doable. It's not like a quick, fast, easy fix in every venue. But I think the fast, quick tips are that attitude is everything. And if every business just invested a little bit more time, education, training in turning information into understanding and turning that into appreciation, that would go an incredibly long way. Because by doing that, that's when we can start to come together to problem solve, and we can see that actually we're not going to be able to fix this exact situation within this environment, and this is the environment that we've got, but we can find a way around it, because we can meet people where they are, not where we're expecting them to be. We can open up those conversations, and we're going to feel confident having those conversations with people who are different from ourselves in a way that's just feels authentic, not stilted. And I think that's a skill, and it requires practice. So if we can take that into our workplaces and practice it and skill people up to make them feel, to make our events team feel more comfortable and confident, that's a step that costs so little in time and investment, and the outcome from that one thing, that one change, would be incredible.
So we're going to talk about a very hot topic now, AI. You recently wrote a fantastic article for Meetings and Incentive Travel magazine. What does AI mean for disabled people and events? So can you share your thoughts here, obviously the risks, the opportunities, and what we really need to be thinking about now?
Yeah, well, it was an important thing for me to write, actually, because what I was seeing was just such an excitement about AI and it moving so quickly, and already it's in everything that we touch, even if we don't probably even know it. And actually, I was becoming quite worried about this, particularly for my minority group, the people who live with disability, who actually are already a group that isn't always thought about as carefully as it might be within the events world. And so I kind of really wanted to kind of just get that conversation going about looking at it from a slightly different perspective. And I think where there is risk is that we already don't create environments that are inclusive and accessible to 24% of the population. So how many of those people are already going, well, actually, I'm not even going to bother turning up? So they're never going to be represented at that event. They're never going to fill out a feedback form because they weren't at that event. And you're never going to collect their data or information. So already you're not getting that information. You're only collecting the information of people who fit the norms. And what do algorithms do? They just auto-generate on the norms, and they take the norms and then they just replicate it. So what we're in danger of doing, if we're not really careful, if we're not involving people with all sorts of different perspectives and different backgrounds in that collection of the data, in those algorithms, is we're just going to replicate a world that only fits those people that fit the norms. And I think that's a really worrying situation. So, let me give you an example of how that might play out. We've got chatbots, for example, that are helping events in so many ways, in answering the frequently asked questions when somebody phones up, and they can or is online filling out their sheet, and they can have a chat with a chatbot. But have you done that? Where does that take you next? And does it take you to a person who you can have a conversation with? Very rarely. And you have to get quite a long way down the line, don't you? So now put yourself into the position with somebody who might have upper mobility limitations, who isn't able to sort of access a keyboard quite so easily, or the functionality on the keyboard isn't connected with the way that program has been built, and they can't actually interact with that chatbot. Well, the chatbot hasn't been programmed to answer the questions that will serve me. So my questions are going to be, well, is the environment accessible? How many steps will there be? Will I be able to have a choice of where I sit? And in my experience, the people that can answer those are people, human beings. And even now, I've been put off booking events because it's just been impossible to do. I can't get past that. I can't find out if this event is going to be truly accessible to me, because I can't get past an algorithm or a chatbot that won't take me any further. And it's a big frustration in the disabled
Which
community.
Never consider.
But on the flip side, things like ChatGPT, it has amazing opportunity to support a disabled community. So, for somebody who has sight limitation, instead of opening up 5 different tabs in their browser, they're able to have chatbot just find out do the quick wins for them and pull it all together and find the information and get it to them. So there are huge benefits if we can harness it correctly, but we have to ensure that we have involved the entire diverse community in the algorithms that are programming these things. But the opportunity for AI to benefit, and driverless cars for people with sight limitation who'll be able to get to your event really easily instead of going on 5 different changes of train. I mean, wouldn't that be an amazing thing? The opportunity is incredible, as long as we've put the effort in behind the scenes, and if we've collected the data, if we're creating spaces that are inviting and welcoming everybody in, and everybody can have that voice and give that feedback, and their data has counted, and that goes forward into us all being able to create AI which engages with an audience, with the whole audience. Now that's the world I'd like to be part of, and that makes everyone's life easier.
Yeah,
so
100%. Yeah. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.
And very education,
a complete education, but super rich, super powerful conversation. Really eye-opening for sure. But yeah, inspiring, full of real world content and value. And I think hopefully the listeners are going to take so much away. I know I have. And different lenses make a great world, I would say. So if you want to connect with Rachel, find out more about accessibility and inclusion solutions, we'll pop the link in the show notes. But listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to The Last Word. We'll be back soon with more stories from people challenging the norm, shifting perspectives and shaping the future of the events industry and beyond. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps others to find the show. And if you're feeling extra generous, share it with somebody who you would think will love it too. But until next time, thank you so much. And Rachel, thank you again.